For most of modern history, cracked foundations have been treated as an unavoidable part of construction. Buildings settle, concrete fractures, roads buckle. Entire industries now exist to repair the consequences. But many ancient builders approached the problem very differently. They did not assume the ground beneath a structure could simply be overpowered with mass and rigidity. Instead, they assumed the earth itself was active, seasonal, unstable, and constantly changing. That difference in philosophy explains why some foundations built centuries ago remain stable while modern slabs often fail within a generation. Across parts of Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the Americas, archaeologists continue uncovering structures whose lower foundations show remarkably little movement despite surviving floods, earthquakes, drought cycles, and repeated occupation layers. The deeper researchers study these systems, the clearer one pattern becomes. Ancient builders focused less on the visible structure and more on preparing the ground beneath it. The lost secret was never a magical material or forgotten formula. It was patience, compaction, drainage control, and an understanding that stability begins long before the first wall rises above the surface. The oldest surviving foundations were designed to cooperate with the environment instead of resisting it. Modern concrete construction often relies on rigid slabs designed to distribute loads evenly. Under ideal conditions, this works extremely well. But the problem begins when moisture changes soil density unevenly beneath the structure. Clay expands. Frost lifts sections upward. Water erodes substrate. Eventually, stress concentrates inside the concrete itself. Ancient builders faced the same environmental problems, but many solved them differently because they lacked industrial materials capable of masking poor preparation. In ancient Mesopotamia, builders working with mud brick understood that elevated stone and gravel foundations were essential in regions vulnerable to seasonal flooding. Structures failed quickly if groundwater rose into walls. Long before formal engineering terminology existed, builders recognized capillary moisture movement and attempted to interrupt it using compacted rubble layers. The Romans expanded these principles into one of the most sophisticated infrastructure systems of the ancient world. Roman roads survived not because the paving stones were unusually strong, but because the substrate beneath them was carefully layered and compacted. Multiple levels of crushed stone, gravel and sand dispersed pressure while draining water away from load-bearing surfaces. Many Roman roads remain visible today for a reason often overlooked in modern discussions of engineering history. Water rarely remained trapped inside the system. Drainage channels, crowned surfaces, and compacted aggregate layers worked together to prevent gradual destabilization beneath the structure. That same logic shaped Roman military construction. Legions moving through hostile territory often built fortified camps in a single day. These temporary installations still required drainage ditches, compacted surfaces, and stable defensive embankments. Roman military doctrine treated terrain preparation as a survival requirement, not merely an engineering preference. A poorly drained camp became a disease risk. Unstable ground weakened defensive walls. Mud reduced mobility during attacks. Preparation of the ground itself directly influenced military readiness and long-term survival. Centuries later, medieval castle builders inherited many of these lessons, particularly in regions with unstable soils or heavy seasonal rainfall. In northern Europe, castle foundations were frequently placed on compacted rubble trenches rather than continuous rigid slabs. Builders understood that frost movement and groundwater pressure would gradually shift structures over time. Instead of attempting to eliminate movement entirely, they created systems capable of tolerating gradual settlement without catastrophic cracking. This distinction matters. Many ancient foundations survive precisely because they allowed controlled movement. Dry-laid stone systems flex slightly under pressure. Loose aggregate dispersed water, and absorbed seasonal expansion. Structures settled gradually and predictably rather than resisting every environmental force through rigid compression. In earthquake-prone regions, this principle became even more important. The Inca Empire developed one of the most remarkable examples of seismic adaptation in pre-industrial construction. In places like Cusco and Machu Picchu, massive stone foundations were carefully fitted together without mortar. The stones locked into one another while still allowing micro-movements during earthquakes. Spanish colonial structures built later with rigid masonry often collapsed under seismic stress, while portions of older Incan foundations remained intact beneath them. This was not accidental craftsmanship or mysterious lost technology. It reflected generations of observation. Builders living in unstable mountain regions learned that flexibility preserves structures better than rigidity alone. The same principle later influenced modern seismic engineering in subtle ways. Expansion joints, flexible supports, and segmented structural systems all reflect an understanding ancient builders reached through experience rather than laboratory testing. What modern societies often call innovation is sometimes a rediscovery of older environmental knowledge. One of the least appreciated aspects of historical construction is the labor devoted to compaction. Modern machinery has distanced many people from the physical reality of preparing stable ground. Ancient laborers understood that loose soil eventually becomes structural failure. Entire work crews spent weeks compacting earth, gravel, and crushed stone before major foundations were laid. This process mattered because, well, air pockets and inconsistent density create future settlement zones beneath structures. Once weight concentrates unevenly, cracking becomes inevitable. Even today, off-grid builders, survival homesteaders, and traditional masons continue using manual compaction techniques in remote areas where heavy machinery is unavailable. A modern tool like the 8x8-inch steel tamper with a 48-inch handle, basically a heavy-duty hand compactor for leveling soil, gravel, sand, asphalt, ground, paver, driveway, garden, yard, and blacktop repair, operates on the same mechanical principle as historical tamping methods used for centuries. Whether preparing a Roman roadbed, a medieval courtyard foundation, or a modern gravel base, the objective remains unchanged: eliminate instability before weight is introduced above it. Ancient builders understood that failures hidden underground eventually rise to the surface. This lesson became especially important during wartime construction. Military engineers throughout history learned quickly that fortifications collapse from below as often as from direct attack. Poor drainage undermined walls. Saturated soil weakened artillery positions. Temporary fortifications built too quickly often settled unevenly, reducing structural integrity before combat even began. During the First World War, trench systems demonstrated the same relationship between terrain and survival on an industrial scale. Engineers and soldiers constantly battled groundwater, collapsing trench walls, and unstable foundations beneath defensive positions. Drainage systems became as critical as weapons supply. In some sectors, poorly prepared ground turned entire trench lines into unusable swamps during heavy rains. Troop movements slowed, defensive firing positions deteriorated, disease spread more rapidly in waterlogged environments. These conditions reinforced an old military reality. The ground itself becomes part of the battlefield. Historical armies that ignored terrain preparation consistently suffered logistical and defensive problems regardless of technological advantage. That lesson extends far beyond warfare. Many ancient settlements survived centuries because builders chose stable locations carefully. Villages were often placed on elevated ground with natural drainage. Builders avoided flood-prone soils unless extensive preparation was possible. Terrain analysis was not academic. It determined whether communities could endure. Modern industrial expansion frequently reversed this logic. Wetlands were filled, marginal land was rapidly developed, standardized concrete systems were applied across radically different soil conditions. The result has been widespread long-term settlement problems hidden beneath modern infrastructure. This does not mean ancient construction was universally superior. Many ancient buildings failed, collapsed, or disappeared entirely, but the structures that endured reveal consistent priorities. Modern construction sometimes neglects drainage, adaptability, compaction, and respect for local environmental conditions. Ancient builders lacked advanced chemistry, industrial steel reinforcement, and modern excavation machinery. What they possessed instead was an intimate understanding of terrain earned through repeated failure over generations. They built more slowly because mistakes carried enormous consequences. A failed granary threatened famine. A cracked fortress wall threatened invasion. A collapsed bridge isolated entire regions. Survival depended on understanding the interaction between earth, water, climate, and weight. In many ways, these builders approach construction more like long-term environmental management than industrial assembly. That perspective is becoming increasingly relevant again. As modern regions experience heavier rainfall, prolonged drought cycles, and expanding soil instability linked to climate variation, engineers are revisiting many principles ancient builders considered essential from the beginning. Permeable systems, drainage-first planning, flexible foundation techniques, and layered aggregate construction are no longer viewed as outdated methods. In many environments, they are becoming necessary once again. The deeper lesson is not that the past possessed mystical engineering secrets hidden from the present. It is that older civilizations often paid closer attention to environmental realities because they had fewer ways to ignore them. Stable foundations were never created by concrete alone. They were created by preparation beneath the surface, by understanding terrain before construction began, and by accepting that long-term durability depends less on resisting nature than working with it intelligently. That is why some ancient foundations still stand while modern systems continue cracking around them. And it is why studying these forgotten construction principles still matters today. Not only for historians, but for anyone thinking seriously about resilience, preparedness, and the long-term survival of the structures societies depend on. If you enjoyed this exploration into forgotten engineering knowledge and the hidden systems beneath history's most durable structures, subscribe to History Vault and share this video with others interested in the deeper lessons civilizations leave behind.